In this video, we are going to talk about 5 ways non-romantic relationships are impacted by the fearful avoidant attachment style. I am Pauline and I am so happy you are here because normally the fearful avoidant attachment style, any attachment style, is mostly talked about in the context of relationships, and that's where it probably has the most impact. But that's not the only place. As you probably know, if you've been following me for a while, the fearful avoidant attachment style, maybe even more than all the other attachment styles, has a big impact, or can have a big impact, on many areas in your life, including your non-romantic relationships. So in this video, I'm kind of like lumping them together. This could be work, this could be friendships, and I might make videos specifically. If you're interested, let me know in the comments below. But for now, we are just going to dive into 5 ways non-romantic relationships are impacted by the fearful avoidant attachment style. So the first one is that you have a hard time being consistent. And I immediately have to say, fearful avoidants obviously are different. We're all individuals, we're all unique. So what I have seen and learned is that some people, some fearful avoidants really only get triggered in their attachment style within romantic relationships, and they are totally fine outside of that. Some are triggered in work relationships, but not in friendships. They are very capable and able to have really deep and loving friendships, and they just can't seem to either get their relationships on that same track, or their work is impacted by the fearful avoidant attachment style. So just know that when you recognize this or don't recognize this in some areas, it doesn't mean you don't have the fearful avoidant attachment style. It might just mean that your attachment style gets triggered in romantic relationships and not so much in other areas of your life. This is different for all fearful avoidance. So the first one is you are not consistent, and this can show up in work and also in friendships, where you start a project or you start a friendship, or have an idea to go on a trip, for instance, and you are really excited about it, and your full intention is to finish that, to finish the project, to really go on that trip, and you end up not being able to go. You are maybe it gets overwhelming, or maybe you feel like there are expectations from either your colleagues, your boss, or your friends, and you just have a hard time being consistent. You have a hard time following through with what you said you would do and then doing it, because it could actually be that you said you were going to be there for a friend, and then something came up, or you got triggered in your attachment state, and you are just dealing with yourself. So it's sometimes hard for other people to know what they can expect from you. We have a word for this in Dutch, which is grillig. It's a very Dutch word. But it means that sometimes you are there, sometimes you're not there, and there's just no consistency in that. And there are people that can really well handle that and know how to work around that. And there are people that might have difficulty navigating that, and that is all right. That doesn't say anything about you. You are not a bad person because you have a hard time being consistent. And I've noticed, as I healed the fearful avoidant attachment style, that consistency came so much easier. So I was really hard on myself for not being consistent in so many things. In friendships, I would do these like in-depth things for friends, generous things, whatever. And then for months I wouldn't they wouldn't hear from me, and I would feel so bad for that. And I got to a place of kind of acceptance of that. That's just kind of who I am in a way. And my friends need to understand that. But also, as I started healing, I noticed that consistency was so much easier. And as I look back, I think it was the fear of failure, which is actually the second part, or the second way your non-romantic relationships are impacted by the fearful avoidant attachment style. I was afraid to not live up to the expectations I kind of set myself. And I set high expectations because I always felt like I had to compensate. That was in friendships, but also in work situations. Um, because I just felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like there was something wrong with me. And so I would have these grand gestures towards friends, or like in at work I would say I was going to do all these things, and then my boss was really excited, and then I didn't follow through because I was just afraid of the expectations people had. And sometimes it wasn't even that I set them. I was just afraid that people would have expectations that I wouldn't be able to live up to, and that would cause them to reject me or abandon me. So what felt more safe was to just kind of sabotage it myself before other people could get disappointed in me. And that is a way to get control. And that is what a fearful avoidant really wants. So that fear of failure can really come back in all areas. Also friendships, and also in work relationships, family, being afraid not to live up to expectations, and then sabotaging it yourself just to gain that sense of control. You know where you effed up. You know where you did go wrong, um, so that you won't be in a situation where you feel like you've done your best and it wasn't good enough, because that triggers that wound, that core wound of not being good enough, or there being something really wrong with you. So this is just a fearful avoidant mechanism to cope with that fear of failure and to cope with those core wounds. And when you heal those, this will be so much easier and you won't feel like you always have to compensate. You won't set these super high expectations for yourself, because you know you are enough. You know you're worthy. You know you're valuable just as you are, and not because of what you do, but because of who you are. The third one is you're afraid, you can be afraid to be seen as a fearful avoidant. A lot of fearful avoidant experience pretty intense trauma when they were kids, and it's so logical that then it feels safe to fly under the radar, to not be seen. And I think especially in work, and maybe even more so in entrepreneurship, which ironically a lot of fearful avoidants are drawn to, um, it's really hard to be seen, to put yourself out there, to be vulnerable, because your fear brain associates that with pain and with being punished, and people maybe even laughing at you or being degrading. And that is something you want to avoid at all costs, which is so logical, So just know that you might have that fear to be seen, and that is normal for a fearful avoidant, or logical for a fearful avoidant. And when you start healing, you will notice that that will get better and better. And you will be able to just stand more for who you are and what you believe in. And you will notice that people are actually drawn to you because you're awesome, and you're probably also pretty magical and charming, because that's what fearful avoidants are too. And they love to hear your thoughts and your opinions. And yeah, so that fear to be seen. Now that I am healed and I don't have that fear anymore, or at least not as much, like 1%. I see that it's not that scary to be seen. Of course, there will be people that have different opinions, but that's just what they are, different opinions. It doesn't mean that if somebody has a different opinion that you are in physical danger. And that is what it feels like as a fearful avoidant, to be seen. That if you rock the boat, if somebody doesn't agree with you, if somebody's angry at you even more, so if you make a mistake, for instance, at work, you will be in physical danger. And that's not true. I mean, if it's true, that's a very unhealthy situation, and it's not you, it's not your fault, and you should definitely leave if that's even possible, if that's slightly possible, I mean, and otherwise put up real clear boundaries. So that was the third one. The fourth one is the vulnerability hangover. And this, oh man, I've had this so many times that I would meet somebody. And this can be in friendship situations, but also in work situations. And I would start just telling them a whole bunch of stuff. And then afterwards, I would be like, why? Why did I say that? Why did I tell them all of this? And to give you a really concrete example, um, with my work, I worked at an agency for a year, a little over a year. And one time I was driving towards a work thing with my boss in the car, and all of a sudden I was like telling him my whole family history and just all kinds of things. And that night I laid in bed, and I all those words just came back in my head like a flashback, and I was like, what did I do? Why did I tell him all of this? And that definitely was a vulnerability hangover. But why you do that is because fearful avoidants have a longing and a need for depth and for deep connection. And so when you meet a person where that feels slightly safe, or you feel an opening in whatever way, you share, and you share vulnerably. And that is not a bad thing. It is not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. But with the right people, not everybody can hold space for that gift you're giving them. And that has nothing to do with you. It has to do with them and this society that has trouble doing that. But it is your longing for depth. It is your need for depth and for connection. But then on the other side, and um, that is the irony that is a fearful avoidant attachment style, is that you have a hard time um, feeling that deep connection. So there might be somebody that is safe to be that vulnerable with, and then you are that vulnerable, and they feel like they've had a beautiful conversation with you, and the next time you see them, you're distant and maybe a little bit awkward, and they are like, what happened? Why we had such a beautiful conversation last time we saw each other, so what happened in the meantime? And what happened in the meantime is that you got scared of that feeling of connection, and your fear brain started working, and you started thinking, well, what if they think this? What if they think that? And maybe they aren't conscious thoughts. Maybe it's just you just closed off completely because you are afraid of that connection, are afraid of rejection and abandonment. So that is definitely something I think that happens in non-romantic relationships even more, because you see people once and then you don't see them for a while. So your fear brain has a lot of time to come up with a lot of stories around how they probably thought that was weird what you said, or it was too much, or whatever your fear brain makes of it. Um, so yeah, let me know if you recognize this, if you have had any of these situations in the comments below. Let's share, because the shame we feel around this is not necessary, and is usually almost more painful than the fact that it happens. So share in the comments. Um, and then the fifth one, the last one, is that a lot of fearful avoidance have a hard time trusting that people actually mean well generally. There are there are roughly two ways to look at the world, and this is I didn't come up with this. This is a very, I don't even know if I can credit anybody, but um some people look at the world as being a dangerous place with islands of people who are like nice and kind and safe, and other people look at the world as generally a safe place with islands of people who are dangerous in whatever way. And most fearful avoidant, not all, but most fearful avoidants look at the world as a dangerous place, and they feel like those safe people, either they can't find them or they're not worthy of them. um And they have a really hard time just trusting that actually most people are just genuinely good people, and they want connection, they want to talk to you, they are interested in you, they mean well, they won't get mad when you make a mistake or when you um do something that you find weird, they probably won't even find weird. So that was one of the biggest shifts, I think, in healing the fearful avoidant, that I started looking at the world more and more as a generally safe space with just some people who would get mad for no reason, but that had nothing to do with me. That had to do with them and their capacity for emotional regulation. So it really helps to see the world as a generally safe space, and that people don't generally um, mean ill and won't create so many stories as you think around you or who you are. Most people are just interested, and um, you have so much more to offer than you think just by being yourself and being charming and being warm and being magical, because you have all those um, traits as a fearful avoidant, probably. So that is enough. You are enough. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to say the perfect thing. You don't have to do the perfect thing. People really mostly mean well and just are interested. And um, yeah. And that can come back in either friendships or work relationships, obviously, too. So, those are 5 ways non romantic relationships are impacted by the fearful avoidant attachment style. I'm curious, did you recognize any of these? Do you want to know more about specifically in work or entrepreneurship, um, and or in friendships, how this can come about? And I want to reiterate, some fearful avoidants have really strong, deep connected friendships. Um, and some fearful avoidants have no trouble at work whatsoever. I had trouble in all my areas of life. So I did not have deep connected friendships that were consistent. Um, and I definitely had a hard time at work and work relationships. So yeah, it can go either way. Let me know in the comments below if you recognize any of this. I am so happy you are here as always, and I will see you in the next one.